Hello and welcome to episode 3 of my series on why you should not immigrate to England and teach. My name is Mr. Rufail and I taught high school geography for 8 years in 7 schools in 4 countries and across 3 continents. But on the 15th of December 2023, I quit teaching in England forever and felt a joy and happiness so pure, for a moment I saw the face of God. How traumatizing was it? Let's just say that I'd rather have notorious serial poisoner Graham Young be my personal chef than teach in England again. Because there's a very good reason why articles detailing the teacher exodus have titles like, "I would burn in hell before returning," why British teachers are fleeing overseas. There's less time spent managing behaviour and more time doing what teachers love, teaching their subject. At home, he says, his work was results and Ofsted-driven. Here, he feels he can be more creative, more independent. In the UK, you are constantly having to report to certain people about certain things. Here, you are trusted to do what you think is best for the student. I told you, none of these articles would surprise you by the end of this series. This 4-part series is me ringing the warning bell so you can be spared from the trauma teaching in this country will give you. Think of this series as the alarm, and this as the snooze button.
It's not all bad. You'll find many teachers in England love what they do, and in fact many other countries also have problems, so there is no reason to make such warnings. Everything is fine. International teachers should be encouraged and feel welcome to make the move.
To help me, as usual, I'll be using the same in-text reference system I use in my 2 documentaries. One is a 3-part documentary on the COVID pandemic, and the other is on the climate crisis. Link in the description. Here's how it works. I'll show you a source. For example, this article from The Guardian titled, "Newly qualified teachers quit UK for schools abroad due to better pay and conditions." Explaining that, teacher training courses across the country are warning of a rise in the number of trainees opting for international posts for their first job, attracted by higher salaries, more respect in and out of the classroom, and an escape from Ofsted. It's madness here. But again, none of these articles should surprise you by the end of this series. But hopefully you notice the number in the top right corner. If you want to do your own research about something I've shared, all you need to do is find that number from the list of sources in the description, and you'll have access to all of my sources. I'll be using this in-text reference system so you can investigate my claims as I make them, and so you can realize that the case I'm presenting here is not subjective. My experience will be the same as your experience.
It'll happen to you.
The reasons why I left teaching in England will be the reasons you left teaching in England. I just want you to have a well-informed and fair insight before making any reckless decisions, like immigrating to England.
Brother,
Now, this series is broken into 4 parts. The first 3 are why you should avoid teaching in England, with the first 2 being specific to teachers and the third one general, and the 4th, solutions that I believe could solve a lot of the problems mentioned in this series. If you haven't seen episode 1 and 2, please do. Virtually all of the context in this episode will be lost on you if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes. In a nutshell, episode 1 covers the overpowered, destructive arm of Ofsted, how it terrorizes schools, suffocates the passion of good teachers, and serves no function. Episode 2 explores the worst part of teaching in England, English people. They're rude, dishonest, disrespectful, they steal all the time, they're violent and aggressive, they don't care about their education, are very dumb, and have about as much resilience as they have self-awareness, which is 0. These 2 reasons are single-handedly why I quit teaching in England forever. I pray that I was able to convince you that teaching in England is a big mistake and that you deserve better. If you are not yet convinced, episode 3 is my final plea for you to avoid England and choose any other country. Because you might still want to immigrate to England because England is one of the wealthiest nations in the world and offers some of the best opportunities and benefits out of all the rich first world developed countries in Europe. But what I intend to prove to you with this 3rd episode is that England is the opposite of a rich first world developed country. England is a 3rd world country. Please note, in the end of this video, I'll be telling you all of the great things that you can experience in England and why you should add it to your list for a temporary visit. England is fantastic for tourism. With that said, let's get started with why I believe England is a 3rd world country. I'll be presenting these points quickly and in categories, similar to news style. Let's get started. In policing, the UK is riddled with crime, and police do barely anything about it. Over 90% of criminal offences go unsolved in the UK. Nearly half of burglaries in England and Wales go unsolved, effectively decriminalising it. Many locals now believe that burglary has become a free hit for criminals. And they're not wrong. Shoplifting is so chronic in England that the Co-op boss says criminal gangs are operating exempt from consequences, with a startling remark that police fail to attend nearly 80% of the time to deal with serious offenders. The police don't even show up. Frankly, they're too busy with more pressing matters.
In 2012, Rowan Atkinson argued for removing insulting from Section 5 of the Public Order Act due to its threat to free speech and absurd arrests. Though insulting was removed in 2014, abusive remained, leaving little change.
Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context.
Not the 9 o'clock news is the show Rowan Atkinson is referring to. He played the station commander and is about to highlight ridiculous reasons behind a wave of arrests.
Walking on the cracks in the pavement. Walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly?
A man put in handcuffs, arrested, humiliated in front of his neighbours, all over a Facebook joke.
They're very keen to police people's thoughts, but they have absolutely no interest in policing actual crime, with only 5% of burglaries solved in the UK last year. Appalling.
The authorities have been going wild prosecuting people for saying silly things on social media that they claim are linked to the disorder. But I don't think they should be. They shouldn't be wasting their time in this way. They shouldn't have spent so much time investigating poor old Bernie. I mean, particularly when you consider that last year there was not a single burglary solved in nearly half the regions in England. I mean, it's little wonder the police can't solve burglaries, can't stop auto theft, can't do anything about violent crime, knife crime on the streets when they're too busy policing our tweets.
Police should be catching criminals, not involving themselves in spats on Twitter and frivolous attempts at inclusion like dancing on duty, Chief Constable warns. No wonder criminals don't fear the law in England.
I care about the fact that you've been terrorising all these people for a sustained period of time. I also care about the fact you've only got a tiny fine today, no deterrent to you whatsoever. You don't show any real remorse. You don't really care, do you?
The UK laws are weak, simple as. And that's the UK laws are weak, simple as, and that's not my fault. That's not my fault.
Lawlessness in Britain is so rampant and corrupt that violent grooming gangs are often ignored because of political correctness. The most famous grooming gang is probably the Rotherham grooming gang, who were sentenced to a combined 103 years in prison for rape and sex abuse of girls, about 1,400 girls as young as 11. These are mostly not white British men, some were white British women it seems, but they're mostly South Asian men. So for the record, non-English people commit horrible crimes in England. They steal, murder, stab and do countless other crimes. But my point is that the white British authorities do nothing about it.
Gangs of predominantly British, Pakistani, Afghan and Bangladeshi men have been raping vulnerable working-class white girls on an industrial scale, and the police have been too afraid of being called racist to act. And it's still happening. How many girls were drugged, raped, murdered or had their lives destroyed because of police indifference? There would be riots on the streets if this was happening the other way around. There would have been marches, demonstrations, it would have kicked off big time. Our left-wing politicians would have been falling over themselves to call it out in Parliament, and the police probably wouldn't have let it happen in the first place.
It was in 2023 that the UK government decided to take action. Asian grooming gangs will no longer be allowed to evade justice because of cultural sensitivities. The safety of women and girls is paramount. Far too long, political correctness has stopped us from weeding out vile criminals who prey on children and young women. We will stop at nothing to stamp out these dangerous gangs. It comes after the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse warned in October that victims and survivors suggested that professionals feared allegations of racism and that this was prioritized over their safety, allowing the horrific abuse of children as young as 11 to continue because you don't want to be seen as racist. One word for that: lawlessness. And bad news to those considering moving to England to escape political or religious persecution. In England, laws, rules, and expectations are often enforced unfairly. What is illegal and warrants police action for some is allowed and promoted for others.
Isn't that beautiful? The sound of Islamic domination across London. And the police are perfectly okay with this. But not too long ago, they arrested a woman who was praying quietly in front of an abortion center. And here is a man arrested for preaching in London because...
He said reading from the Bible is discrimination. That's what he said.
It's true. But this is just music to the ears of every non-Islamophobic, culturally enriched resident of London.
Now, I'm not English, so I have the self-awareness to recognize what I'm about to say is very cringy. But I've written a short poem about England willingly surrendering its once-envied way of life. When in Rome, do as the Romans. But Britain lost its cultural tokens. Trading heritage for foreign favours, Britain forgot its roots. Behaviour wavers. Police are so ineffective in Britain that the policing minister is asking the public, if you see a shoplifter, you should arrest them yourselves. Just pray to God that he doesn't have a knife.
This enormous statue has, in fact, been responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. Known as the Knife Angel, this grim monument from England is composed of 100,000 knives, all of which were wielded by criminals. The 8-meter-high statue was crafted in 2018 by British artist Alfie Bradley. He gathered these knives from 43 different police stations and constructed the statue to raise awareness about knife violence and to honor the victims of knife-related crimes.
In education, schools in England are crumbling and getting denied urgently needed repairs. It's so bad that buckets on desks, freezing classrooms, and power cuts are all becoming commonplace. Tim Warnerford, a building consultant who helped write bids for many academies, said, "There are now many hundreds of schools whose staff and pupils will return after Easter to buildings that are unsafe, cold, and damp." And this next part is kind of funny. The boilers in English schools are so old they need to contact retired engineers because they're the only ones that know how they work.
Find me a 90-year-old projector and I'll prove it to you.
A study by King's College London found that all new schools planned in England between 2017 and 2025 are in areas with unsafe air quality. They found the average levels of PM 2.5, a harmful air pollutant, were more than double the recommended amount.
PM 2.5 is dangerous because it can get into our lungs, past our nose hairs, through our throat, into our lungs, and then finally into our bloodstream and cause all kinds of havoc on the body. Let's talk about some of the health effects of PM 2.5. Long-term health effects are a little bit more severe. We have things like heart attacks and heart issues or heart disease. In fact, because this PM 2.5 is getting into our lungs, it's getting into our bloodstream, it can cause all kinds of effects on our entire body. There's also been studies showing that it can affect the IQ of children and have effect on young children and early born children as well.
This means that the children and staff in these new schools will be exposed to unhealthy levels of air pollution. And it somehow gets even worse, as teachers in England and Wales report vermin and pests in schools. A survey by the UK's biggest education union on the state of school buildings in England and Wales has found 2 in 5 teachers are reporting signs of vermin or pests, and more than a quarter complaining of sewage or wastewater leaks. In well-being, the United Kingdom is the second most miserable country in the world. The only country more miserable than the UK is Uzbekistan. Side note, on the Human Development Index, the UK is ranked 15th, and Uzbekistan is ranked 106th, a gap of 91 places. But perspective is everything. I want you to imagine you're invited to 2 weddings. One is for a very rich man, and the other is for a very poor man. Both weddings sucked. And suppose the poor man's wedding is only very slightly worse than the rich man. But given the rich man's wealth gives him the opportunity and means to produce a fantastic wedding, that fall from their potential makes the rich man's disaster wedding significantly worse, since he is competing with someone with limited resources and yet achieved a similar outcome. Considering all factors, I have no objection placing the UK dead last as the most miserable country in the world. So no surprise, a 2011 survey ranked the UK as having the worst quality of life in Europe. The survey blames a high cost of living, low sunshine hours, below average government spending on education and healthcare, and fewer vacation days compared to the European average. That was 2011. Ask anyone, was the quality of life in the UK better or worse in 2011 or
2024?
They'll all tell you it was better in 2011, and it had the worst quality of life back then. 8 years later, the UK ranks as one of the worst countries to live in the world. That's according to the major benchmark Expat Insider 2019 report, which surveyed 20,259 expats representing 182 nationalities and living in 187 countries or territories. Britain came in at 62nd place out of 64 countries for personal happiness, with rising living costs, inadequate healthcare services, and increased crime rates contributing to their mark.
Let me ask you a question. How many of you watching me right now are applying for a student visa to the United Kingdom? How many of you are planning to go on a holiday to England? How many of you want to move to the UK or get a job in the UK? I'm sure many of you have been sold a dream of a cushy life in England. Well, today, let me break it to you. Your dream life in the United Kingdom will be a nightmare. The United Kingdom is quickly becoming the worst place to live. You see, life in the UK is not a romantic movie anymore, decorated with stunning castles and historical universities. Life in the UK is currently a horror film riddled with multiple crises. A recession, food shortages, crippling cost of living, a failing government healthcare system. All these crises have spiraled out of control, and Rishi Sunak's government is drowning in a sea of trouble.
And for those desperate to blame the pandemic, London ranked as one of the worst places to live in the world even before coronavirus. And this is despite Britain residents receiving comparatively high pay. Even the sky is depressed to be in England.
Week 2 of no contact with the sun. The depression is starting to kick in. It's 2 p.m. It feels like it's 8 p.m. Vitamin D is no longer existent, and people tell me, go outside, go enjoy the colors of the world. I'm like, which two colors? The white or the grey? There's no more color.
In the workforce, cleaners, one of the most important people in any country, are attacked while cleaning public bathrooms, getting cans and plastic bottles thrown at them while doing their job. In response to the assault, the council has decided to close the toilets early. And it's not just having cans and bottles thrown at them. Cleaners in the UK are getting stabbed. County Square shopping centre in Ashford issues stab-proof vests to cleaners as part of their everyday uniform to help keep them safe. And abuse of retail workers in the UK has doubled. So nearly 90 UK retail leaders have written to the Home Secretary demanding new laws to make assaulting and abusing staff a specific criminal offence. In elderly affairs, most countries take care of their senior citizens, but not here. In England, the council can force an elderly couple in their 80s to sell their house they've lived in for over 50 years to accommodate asylum seekers.
How does it make you feel about the idea that a council priority is not the fact that you're there paying your council tax, but they want to move asylum seekers in?
It makes me feel very angry because, as I said, we purchased the property, we've paid the council tax, the people who owned it before would have paid their council tax. How do they assess these properties for asylum seekers and Afghans and whatever? What about people that are on housing lists that have been waiting for years?
In healthcare, hundreds of NHS nurses suspected of faking qualifications. We're talking more than 700 nurses are under investigation. The fraud is they either faked their qualifications or made others take their final exam in their place. So if you, God forbid, get sick in England, your nurse might be totally unqualified.
We've got a 45-year-old male, type B negative, brought in by paramedics 10 minutes ago.
He's got a penetrating injury to the left chest.
Yes. Gotta get him in there right now.
Doctor, it looks like a bullet in the lower thorax.
And your biggest fear should be if you get a toothache, because finding a dentist is so rare in the UK that hundreds queued for hours at new NHS dental practice in Bristol amid shortage. Police were forced to intervene and send people home in the early afternoon because the surgery was unable to meet the demand.
doesn't end today or end in a few days' time, but you can just come back tomorrow or the day after to register. Okay. No, I really do empathise. No, I completely empathise. We didn't make the decision. The dentist has made the decision of where to go.
Use for NHS dental treatment hit third day.
And when they do get a dentist appointment, they make the news. Ex-miner thrilled to get an appointment after 7-month wait. The lack of basic dental care is so dire that some have even resorted to pulling out their own teeth with a pair of pliers.
It got so painful and so wobbly, I just started pulling them out.
Just looking in the mirror is now difficult for Caroline. After 3 years searching for an NHS dentist, she resorted to pulling out 12 of her teeth.
At the top, all there is left.
Alex Gray doesn't have many of his own teeth left now, but if any cause him pain, he turns to his toolbox.
This is my painkillers. Makes me numb. That's when I get my pliers out and then I start to... Well, here goes.
He's pulled out 6 of his own teeth at his home in Hayington near Lincoln, and after a 6-year fruitless hunt for an NHS dentist, would do so again.
It must really hurt.
It does, but at the end of the, what do you do? Do you have toothache for 2 or 3 days and you can't sleep for it, or do you try and do something about it? As I said, the last 2 or 3 years, I just can't get even to anybody to admit that they do NHS.
They started arriving at 7 a.m, driven every single one of them by pain and decay. A queue in 21st century Britain and Bury St Edmunds for a charity providing emergency dental care.
I yanked out one of my back teeth because I was in so much pain, it was loose, so I just wiggled it and used numbing solution that you can get over the counter from the pharmacy, numbed the area and then wriggled it and pulled it out myself.
Ow! Did that hurt?
It was one of the back teeth. Yeah, it hurt, but I was in so much pain I had no other choice.
This woman didn't want to be identified, but she showed us the teeth she had pulled out herself.
I phoned the dentist, couldn't get anywhere.
And are you in pain now?
Yes, this tooth up the top here. I've only actually got about 5 teeth left at the top, so I've got a plate for the others. No good
and
now.
what's the pain like?
Oh, it's aching.
So this is what the gum looked like then when I pulled the tooth out. I couldn't put up with it anymore. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Trying to get through a work day with that constantly throbbing. Every time I called them, I was told, nope, we can't do anything. So I started trying to pull bits of it out with pliers.
People in the UK have been forced to pull out their own teeth at home using shoelaces.
Now, it was 8 years ago that a GMB investigation revealed how difficult it was getting to get an NHS dentist appointment in England. Well, now, as the government promises to provide 2.5 million more appointments, that's the promise, we found that it's actually become even harder.
A 4-year wait. Only children. OK, that's disappointing. Just private, thanks, bye. I've been struggling to find a dentist or any sort of dental appointment since 2019. Kept on trying to pursue the dentist, going up to the building, trying to make contact with someone. I never got any luck anywhere.
And Ukrainians who moved here on a humanitarian visa get a culture shock from the shortage of dentists. Ukrainians who have moved to the UK have highlighted the lack of dentists as among the most astonishing aspects of British life, according to a new report on the experiences of people granted humanitarian visas. And what is England's genius solution? Foreign dentists to be allowed to work in the UK without qualification checks. Wait, I think I've seen this before.
The NHS has discovered an industrial scale qualifications fraud. More than 700 nurses have been caught in this potential scandal. Apparently, these nurses in Nigeria had other people take their tests for them, pose as they were, and then they showed up in the UK with limited qualifications to do their job.
But overall, the UK has the worst access to healthcare in Europe and one of the worst healthcare systems in Europe. A major study ranked the UK's NHS healthcare system 30th in Europe for overall quality. The state of healthcare is so poor here that GP waiting times in the UK worse than Rwanda, China, and Russia study finds. Even war-torn Ukraine saw better waiting times for a GP than the UK, with 72.3% saying they had access to a primary care doctor within 24 hours. while in Russia, more than half could see a doctor in a day. In defense, Britain no longer has a military. Essentially, a senior US general has privately conveyed to Defense Secretary Ben Wallace that the British Army is no longer regarded as a top-level fighting force. This decline in warfighting capability, resulting from decades of budget cuts, needs urgent reversal, especially in light of Russia's war in the Ukraine. The British Army is currently unable to protect the UK and its allies effectively. It is at such a disastrous level that the British Army may have no choice but to enlist citizens as country not ready for Russian threat, says former colonel.
Do you think that we are ready, fit to play our part in the defence of Europe?
We are, in this country, absolutely not ready. I think what we have to do is to waken up and realise that the battle that the Ukrainians are fighting for their liberty through the illegal invasion from Russia, that if they do not win that, we're next.
There's been a bit of talk this week about the possible return of conscription. Briefly, can you ever see circumstances in which that might happen?
We may have no choice. The recruiting system that the armed forces has failed miserably. And in reaction to that, the government just keeps renewing the contract. When I was a commanding officer, I took a battalion over that was 250 undermanned. I threw out another 47 odd undesirables.
And spare a thought for the Royal Navy, where recruits no longer need to prove that they can swim. Anyone seeking to join the Navy will no longer have to pass a 30-minute swim test prior to signing up, in a bid to boost and speed up recruitment. In public safety, the UK is so dangerous that Somalians are literally returning to Somalia because it's safer than staying in England and Wales.
The present for these boys is 6,000 miles from London on a beach in Kismaayo in southern Somalia. They, like many others, have been sent back by their families, worried for their safety back in the UK.
As the years go by, it was only a matter of time where I would be influenced to do other things like selling drugs, you know. So before I was influenced, I was given a good advice by my parents.
His parents were worried he was going to get into worse trouble, like his friends.
Some of them are either locked up or they've been murdered. In fact, I know 2 guys who are my friends who got murdered. And murder because of knife crime. They got stabbed, both of them.
In transport, London is the world's slowest city for drivers. It takes 37 minutes and 20 seconds to travel 10 kilometres or 6 miles. But spare a thought for public transport.
Do you know how much it costs going from Chelmsford to London for a monthly season ticket?
£200?
Around 150.
So a monthly season ticket is £478.
It's a piss take.
Railway robbery, not highway robbery.
Any idea how much the same ticket for the same distance in Germany is?
God knows.
Want to hazard a guess?
Half price.
250.
Try a bit lower.
150.
Lower.
100?
€49 a month.
That's unbelievable.
Jesus.
I'm moving to Germany.
The UK needs to do better.
So what do you think people are getting for the extra cost they're paying for their train ticket here?
It's so busy, there's always people standing.
And guess what? Train prices
are due to go up.
They're going up another 4.9%.
Are they?
Yeah.
When?
Now.
Above the rate of inflation again.
We'll be up to about over £500 a month then, wouldn't it? £6,000 a year. That's just it's not value for money, is it?
Do it.
I'm getting the bus back.
In international affairs, Britain has become a safe haven for terrorists and foreign criminals. I wonder why. Afghan sex offender avoids deportation over risk of mob violence. An immigration tribunal judge agreed with lawyers that his risky behaviours would expose him to ill treatment and even mob violence if he returns to Afghanistan. Christopher Hanson, the tribunal judge, therefore ruled that the man should be granted refugee status, allowing him to remain in the UK.
And this is the extraordinary case of another convicted sex offender who continues to act inappropriately towards women, but was allowed to stay in Britain because committing sexual acts in public in Afghanistan would put him at high risk of physical violence from mob mentality.
England is allowing a repeat sex offender to stay in the country because deporting him might mean he gets mob justice in his home country. So instead, they've decided to give him a visa and keep him in England where he can continue sexually assaulting people without any real consequences. Have you ever seen a weaker country? Even when the UK tries to be compassionate, they're cruel and careless. In human rights, a UN envoy claims that the UK is breaching international law due to poverty levels being too high. The UN envoy claims that a significant portion of the population struggles to meet basic needs despite residing in one of the world's wealthiest nations. Apparently, government policies exacerbate inequality and fail to adequately address the root causes of poverty, leaving vulnerable communities in distress. But arguably a bigger fish to fry is the fact that UK among the worst countries for children's rights, new report finds. The Kids' Right Index 2020, published this week, ranked the UK 169 out of 182 countries, behind Yemen, Sierra Leone, Sudan, and Iraq. It measures children's rights according to 5 indicators: life, healthcare, education, protection, and child's rights environment. And the UK was placed behind numerous developing countries, even some war-torn nations. Ultimately, when it comes to children's rights, it is paramount to protect them from things that might cause harm, abuse, or neglect. Unfortunately, England child alcohol use tops global charts, finds World Health Organization report. A third of 11-year-olds and more than half of 13-year-olds in England have drunk alcohol, putting it top out of 44 countries examined in a report by global health experts. What an alarm. Britain has the worst rate of child alcohol consumption in the world. Over half have drunk booze by 13. That's the alarm. Here is the snooze button.
We are a nation that can't hold our drink. And it isn't just, oh, I'm a bit tipsy. This is affecting massive parts of our lives, socially, health-wise, and lots of other things.
And Steve, how would you respond to that? You say that it's part and parcel of British culture, but you must accept it's gone a little bit too far.
No, I can't say we've got a problem, and compared to who? I'm lucky, my job's taken me all over the world. We're not the only ones. People drink all over the world.
I've no doubt that that is the case, that people do drink all over the world. But the statistics show, this latest report says that, children under the age of even 13 are the worst drinkers or the biggest drinkers globally.
I drank at 13. You grow up quick if you're working class in the UK. And one of the reasons that you do that is because you want money. And you want money. And one of the reasons you want money is so you can buy alcohol. It's just a rite of passage. We just do it a bit younger. I gave my kids alcohol when they were children.
In housing, England has the lowest number of houses available in the developed world, and the highest rate of inadequate housing in Europe. Hungary, for example, has one of the lowest average annual incomes in Europe, and a GDP 17 times smaller than the UK. Yet Hungarian homes are much more modern than British ones, and half were built after 1971, compared to a third of the UK's housing stock. 1 in 5 people in Britain spend more than 40% of their post-tax income on housing, more than anywhere else in Europe. And the result? England is officially the worst place in the world for finding a home.
I'm paying my landlord a ridiculous amount of money every month so that I can live in a filthy flat that is infested with black mold. When I first viewed this flat, I was naive. So I'm telling you all this in the hopes that you don't make the same mistakes that I made. And if you spot any of these warning signs whilst viewing a property, consider them a red flag and run, Forrest, run.
The state of English homes are so poor that thousands of babies and toddlers falling sick from damp homes in Britain, NHS doctors warn. So don't be surprised when reading articles that state, refugee returned to Kiev due to state of UK homes. People are literally returning to their war-torn countries for better housing. In tourism, England has one of the worst quality designated bathing sites in Europe.
ITV News has learned that almost 3/4 of Brits will avoid swimming or entering our rivers and the sea because of pollution fears. And it's little wonder why. Last year, water companies in England dumped sewage into our waterways for a total of 3.6 million hours. That figure was up 54% from the number of sewage spills in 2022. Now, contained within the spills is human waste, wet wipes and sanitary products.
In infrastructure, cheap concrete called RAC used in the UK has now resulted in a very real threat that schools and other critical infrastructure could collapse at any moment without warning. Schools in England told to be ready to evacuate buildings at risk of collapse. Department for Education documents show that staff have been instructed to contact leaders of England's schools and academies to check they are prepared to evacuate buildings constructed from reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC, at short notice, and relocate pupils to alternatives such as portable accommodation or even other schools in the area.
The timing couldn't be worse. Days away from children going back to school after the summer break, now facing closures and disruptions. At this Sheffield school, pupils are learning under a 60-year-old roof at risk of collapse.
But first, how tens of thousands of children in England are attending schools with roofs that could collapse at any moment.
Like Singlewell Primary School in Kent, they didn't know they had RAC until the roof collapsed without warning. Luckily, and it was pure luck, it caved in on a weekend when no children were inside. That was in 2018, and despite a national safety alert going out to schools about the concrete, 5 years on, our investigation has found schools still at risk.
And in freedom of speech, we have this.
In Russia last year, 400 people were arrested for things that they said on social media. 400 people in Russia. Obviously, this country is very different. How many people do you think were arrested in Britain for things they said on social media last year?
Go on.
Take a guess.
I've no idea.
3,300.
Really? Arrested for what they'd said on social media?
Yeah.
Really? What sort of things get you
Well,
arrested?
one example I give in my show is there was a young woman from Liverpool called Chelsea Russell. Her friend was killed in a car crash, a 19-year-old woman. And she posted the lyrics of his favorite song on her Instagram, the lyrics. And there was a rap song, so the lyrics contained several instances of the N-word. Okay? She was arrested, prosecuted, found guilty, given 500 hours of community service and a fine, tagged, and for a year she was under 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. curfew.
If you found that disturbing, do yourself a favour and look up Scotland's new hate speech laws. That's more draconian than what's going on here. But in England, a combination of weak policing, no freedom of speech, and a paralysing fear of saying something upsetting has made basic geography a hate crime.
Hi, the reason why I'm asking you not to film it is because I know that you are putting this on your YouTube.
Doesn't matter where it goes, we're in a free country. Sorry, we're in a democracy. We're not in China. And that's not racist, that's the truth. That's what our forefathers fought for.
Exactly, but you can't say things like that either. You can't just say things
Say what?
like that.
That we're in a free country?
No, that we're not in China.
The police officer's jaw dropped at the hateful crime of stating England isn't China. Now, I want you to be honest with me here. If I was to redact all traces that indicate I'm referring to the United Kingdom, would you assume I'm describing a rich first world developed country or a poor third world underdeveloped country? You can maybe see why my third reason was almost called England is the worst country in the world, but I took some diplomatic steps back and made it England is a third world country. Some nations like North Korea are objectively worse, but if I went to North Korea for a visit, I'd expect to see a poor quality of life and standard of living and an oppressive regime that's isolated itself from global trade. So if in my visit I see that North Korea has a poor quality of life and standard of living and run by an oppressive regime that's isolated itself from global trade, my expectations have matched my reality. But we're talking about England, Great Britain, the country that gave us stainless steel, ping pong, the internet, computer science, the refrigerator, the telephone, the train, and even the light switch. You say the United Kingdom, and everyone who hasn't been here pictures sophistication, culture, resilience, decency, and high morals. It is that 1,000-mile plummet from expectation to reality that makes the UK the worst country in the world. So not only will you have to deal with Ofsted and uncivilized, abrasive people, you'll do so in the worst country in the world. So please, heed my warning. Don't do this to yourself. Pick somewhere else and avoid England lest you live to regret it. What I've described here is plain as day. Some of you might think that what I've said throughout this series will be seen as controversial, but it looks like even the English agree.
Absolutely, because it's a failed society and it's godless. I think it's disgusting. We leave our old people to rot in old people's homes, and then we sit there and say we don't have enough money for nurses. I understand this nurse strike very well and how frustrating it can be if you walk into a hospital and the nurse is not prepared to work. But the nurses would be prepared to work at the current wage if they believed this country was spending its money prudently. When you see this country spending its money and just absolutely wasting it, pulling it out of thin air to fund proxy wars, God knows where, that has nothing to do with them. Of course, as a nurse, you're going to stand up and say, well, can't I get a pay rise? This country has failed on every metric. You're a full-grown man. You're a full-grown adult. When's the last time there's been a serious problem in your life that you completely ignored and it fixed itself? Never, ever. What are any of our politicians doing to fix any of the problems we're genuinely facing?
Well, I saw today that Sadiq Khan is planning to run again for the third term of office as mayor.
Sadiq Khan is a loser because when you have a city which is losing, which London is losing in all metrics across its competitive cities around the world, and you're in charge of it, by extension, you're a loser. And their priorities are completely messed up. Of course the ambulance people are. Of course the ambulance drivers are striking. Of course the nurses are striking. Nobody cares about the most important things in this nation. It's a failing country in real time, and that's why I've left.
What about the specific allegation? By the way, I don't disagree with a lot of that because I do think this country is in big trouble. And I do think that one of the problems is people think if they do have a crime against them, nobody cares anymore.
Your agency selling you teaching in England know it's a nightmare here. But they're not going to warn you. But, Habibi, I will. Now, as promised, I'm going to tell you about some of the amazing parts of England that you've got to let yourself experience. I've made a list of 10 things you need to do in your temporary visit to England. Here we go. England makes great food, especially breakfast and roast dinners. They're amazing. If you've never had an English breakfast, you need to try them. It's probably my favorite breakfast of all time. Keeping with food, England has some of the most delicious desserts I've ever tried. My favorite is trifle and banoffee pie. England is one of a kind at ceremony. The Queen's funeral, the King's coronation, a royal wedding. They're all conducted so perfectly, with such reverence, honour and respect. And it's the few times I've ever seen the English really embrace their country and be proud of who they are. I'm grateful to have been able to experience some of that firsthand. Needless to say, England has some of the most beautiful castles, churches and classical architectures I've ever seen. Definitely worth visiting. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had to stop and just admire the English countryside. England's landscapes are absolutely gorgeous. I recommend the Lake District. It will take your breath away. I love animals, and the zoos and aquariums in England are fantastic. You really should see them. It's definitely worth a visit. If you love history and culture, some of the most iconic landmarks in the world are right here in England. You can see Stonehenge, Hadrian's Wall, Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, and Parliament House. Remarkable sites worth a visit. The English royal family, love them or hate them, they generate a fortune for tourism. And if you're into the royal family-related attractions, you'll love it. I've been to Buckingham Palace, I saw Princess Diana's wedding dress at Kensington, and more. I love that stuff. It's unique and worth seeing. In England, they've got outstanding theatre productions. The best stage show I've ever seen was Darren Brown's Showman. It was mind-blowing. And the best musical I've ever seen was Sister Act. It was fantastic. So if you're into theatre, you'll love what England has to offer. It's also a great place to sample some of that world-famous English humour. And finally, the English make good hats. This was given to me as a gift by my best friend, and I gotta say, I like this hat. So if you ever visit England, get yourself one of these hats. Not sure exactly what they're called, but they're well-made, comfortable, and stylish. And that's my list of the positives of visiting England. I would add those to your travel plans. You won't regret it. Now, what is really going to blow your mind is that it seems that I've got more positive things to say about England than English people. I said English food is great, but a 2019 survey shows almost half of Brits find food from other countries to be far tastier and more exciting. I praised English ceremony, while some complain that the royal family was terribly white.
There is a bit of me that we've gone from the rich diversity of the Abbey to a terribly white balcony. I'm very struck by that. I'm also looking at those younger generations and thinking, what are the nuances that they will inhabit as they grow?
Maybe someone should explain to her how genetics works. White parents will produce white children, so a white royal family will have white relatives. I told you how much I love the English countryside, but wildlife charities in England claim that the British countryside is a racist and colonial white space. Apparently, racist colonial legacies continue to frame nature in the UK as a white space, and claims that the perception that green spaces are dominated by white people can prevent people from ethnic minority backgrounds from using green spaces. I'm an ethnic minority, and I love the green spaces in England. The English countryside is one of the best I've ever seen. I told you about the incredible landmarks in England like Stonehenge, but the BBC, funded by the taxpayer, claims it was built by black people and pushes it onto children. I told you about how much I appreciate royal family-based attractions, while some in England believe that abolishing the monarchy is an important step towards building a fairer society. Even former Prime Minister Liz Truss shares these views.
As a young Lib Dem, Liz Truss called for the abolition of the monarchy, but today she has been appointed by the Queen as her 15th Prime Minister.
And I told you how fantastic theatre productions are in England. But some organisations claim it's institutionally racist and have even held black-only performances to be free from the white gaze.
He said, let me guess, white devil, white devil?
So, despite everything, even I seem to have more positive things to say about England than some English people. And I believe England is the worst country in the world. Now, I'm going to keep track of the situation in England. If it ever changes for the better and suddenly becomes a good place to live and work, I'll upload a video right here confirming the changes and how it's improved. Otherwise, you'll get a short video confirming that nothing has changed, and it's still a horrible prospect teaching in England. That concludes my 3 reasons why you, my valued international brothers and sisters in Christ, should never teach in the United Kingdom. Ofsted has a tight stranglehold that prevents teachers from innovating, teaching, and maintaining some work-life balance. The English people will argue and lie against you constantly, all the while starting fights, disrupting your lessons, and being oblivious of their surroundings while doing so. And the host country is a dystopia, riddled with crime that police are seemingly indifferent to solve, crumbling buildings, no freedom of speech, and a poor quality of life and standard of living. So please, consider what I have told you. I feel obligated to warn you as my fellow international teachers. Do not teach here. You will have a horrible time and it's not worth it. With my reasons why you should not immigrate to England and teach being complete, now is the time where I tell you my solution to improving schools and the overall experience of Britain. For that,